Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Happy Monday. No sane American approves of what Russia has done in Ukraine. We certainly don't, and we don't know anyone who does.
Yeah, and one more thing about that. So I hear Tulsi and Tucker and Jimmy Dore all say like, oh, we're for against the war. That's why we should not help Ukraine. Do not help the Ukrainians. But I've never heard them say, oh, we're also, of course, against Putin, that monster that started this war.
In this country, virtually everyone understands that the invasion of Ukraine is bad. It's bad for us and for the world, and Vladimir Putin is bad too. So effectively in America, those are settled facts. We can stop debating them.
Well, if you're against war, wouldn't you lead with that? Wouldn't you reiterate that all the time? Wouldn't you say it once?
Russia has obviously earned our contempt. Most Americans now despise Vladimir Putin, and that's understandable. They're outraged. But moral outrage is not enough. Moral outrage is not a foreign policy.
Wouldn't you say, well, Putin's a monster. He murdered all those civilians, started an imperialistic, aggressive war.
Okay, Putin is bad. Fine, agreed.
It's the exact opposite of reality, right? So Tucker Carlson brings him on and McGregor's like, oh, the Russians are awesome, the Russians are winning. Oh, the Ukrainians, terrible, right? Like, it's just over the top, total 100% Putin propaganda.
So the day that war began, which was February 24th, two things were very obvious. The first was that there was no way the Ukrainian army would be able to win a decisive military victory over Russia. And the reason was simple. Russia is too big, Ukraine is too small. The second thing that was immediately evident about this war was how unusually destructive it was and was going to be. It wasn't just Ukraine that was getting pummeled, though it certainly was. It was the entire Western economy, including our economy. The longer this war goes on, inevitably, the poorer everyone is going to be, with the exception probably of Vladimir Putin.
Well, if you're against war, wouldn't you lead with that? Wouldn't you reiterate that all the time? Wouldn't you say it once?
We don't know how this happened. We, of course, don't know where it's going. Nobody does. But Ben Hall is clearly right when he says this could be a legitimate disaster for Europe. But, of course, the invasion of Ukraine already is a legitimate disaster for Europe and the rest of the world. Europe just lost a huge percentage of its energy supply, which is not a small thing. We're all being reminded of that. So this situation appears to become more chaotic by the day, possibly even spinning out of control. And that, we must be honest, is shocking to us. We've been taken by surprise by the whole thing. We're not the only ones who were, but we're willing to admit it. The only thing more embarrassing than being wrong in your estimates is pretending that you weren't.
But have you ever heard Tucker Carlson apologize, say that he got it wrong? Even just recently, when Ukraine swept through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, pushing Russia out of whole regions, that followed weeks of Tucker Carlson saying the war was about to end, they were about to be totally conquered. Has he said, man, I really flubbed that? No.
We've been taken by surprise by the whole thing. We're not the only ones who were, but we're willing to admit it. The only thing more embarrassing than being wrong in your estimates is pretending that you weren't.
I never exactly understood why it would be a good idea to invade Iraq, but I effectively, passively went along with it. And then I went to Iraq in December of 2003, the day, in fact, Saddam was captured in Tikrit. And I watched the place fall apart, and along with it, a lot of my previous assumptions. And I came back and I admitted I was completely wrong. I'm ashamed. I've been ashamed ever since.
Yeah, I mean, what you're bringing up, John, it would take some self-awareness.
Yeah.
For him and the courage. Be person enough to apologize and say I made a mistake, but he will never do that.
Well, it's discredited by definition because they've made mistakes and they've never apologized. I mean, we make mistakes. Yep. We told our viewers that all these Republicans were going to win in the midterms, and we were completely wrong, and we apologized for it because you're required to apologize when you're wrong. The midterm elections taught me a number of new things, and I should preface my story of what I've learned by telling you that you never learn anything except through pain and humiliation. I've only learned from failure and particularly from humiliation. Now, the midterm elections were like a grave disappointment, I think, to every normal person. But they were particularly painful to me because I got them so completely wrong. Like, I've never gotten anything wronger in my life. So I have no idea how this is going to play out. I'm completely over my brief flirtation with pretending to predict the future. I've thrown my crystal ball away. I'm not going to read your palms. I have no idea what's coming.
The more conspiracy theories you give them, the more they like you. He has overwhelming evidence to that effect. Look at Trump.
No sane American approves of what Russia has done in Ukraine. We certainly don't, and we don't know anyone who does.
okay? So, I mean, and I think there's some percentage chance that's Tucker saying, hey, if I do run, Russians, you know who's your boy? Look, I hate to do it, but I give Tucker credit on this all the time. He's a smart guy, and he knows you gotta chip away at Trump before doing a frontal assault. So he's planting like 20 knives in his back before he hits him in the front. And he's a right winger, so that's how they roll.
Every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question.
They're replacing us as voters. Well, okay, well, who is they? Well, he says, well, it's not about race. So what is? I guess it's about political ideology. But how do you know what their political ideology is?
Now, one upside of moving to Latin America is like-minded neighbors. Hispanics despise Joe Biden too. Biden's approval rating among Hispanic voters in this country has fallen to 24%. That's his lowest among any demographic group. Meanwhile, as of tonight, guess who's the preferred candidate for 2024 among self-described Latinos? That's right, the Taco Bowl guy.
So the only thing you know about them is where they're coming from. And here, think about it this way. If you're a Republican and you're truly not racist, wouldn't you think, oh, good, those are more potential voters for us?
You've heard a lot about the great replacement theory recently. It's everywhere in the last 2 days, and we're still not sure exactly what it is. Here's what we do know for a fact. There is a strong political component to the Democratic Party's immigration policy. We're not guessing this. We know this, and we know it because they have said so. And they say out loud, we are doing this because it helps us to win elections. That's not something they've said once. It's something they've gloated about again and again and again. And we think that's wrong. And in case you doubt us, here they are. So you play clips of them saying it, and you're the deranged conspiracy nut. Maybe the funniest part is they may not be right. Judging by recent polling, it turns out your average Salvadoran landscaper has politics that are a lot closer to Donald Trump's than they are to Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. So their basic calculation may be completely wrong. But that's not even the point. It has nothing to do with who we're letting in. It has something with race and ethnicity. It has to do with two things. One, the purpose of the US government is to serve American citizens, period. And two, you should never craft any federal, which is to say nationwide policy, in order to help a specific political party. That is by itself in isolation immoral. It doesn't matter what the policy is.
Wouldn't you think, oh, good, those are more potential voters for us? Well, why don't you think that? You don't think that because they're not white.